Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we should be live, getting back into it for a couple second round games here. A scintillating two-game slate. I actually kind of like this one. There's, whenever you enter the new rounds of a playoff series, there's sort of an interesting process. Game one, it's generally do your research, look your shit up, or listen to people who do their research and look their shit up. Play the guys that people will underrank because of the difference in the matchups. So whereas most people are like, Al Horford, you should be like, Al Horford. And whereas a lot of people are like, Joel Embiid, you should be like, Joel Embiid. And that's generally how you carry your way through game ones of a slate. Game two, there's still a combination of that. But there's also the endless quest to take advantage of people looking at recency bias. So it's a combination of having done your legwork, knowing what's going on, and concurrently spending some attention to what happened in game one, what seems like it'll be repeatable, what isn't. Go back and look at who guarded who and how much, and we'll have a chat about that for a bit regarding both teams, although the regular season records for the Trailblazers and the Nuggets less relevant for our pursuit of gold this evening than looking at that first game between the Sixers and the Raptors. Joel Embiid, now a game-time decision with a rumbly in his tumbly. This to no end frustrating because I'll have to spend some 10 or 15 minutes talking about it, and I have to imagine he plays, since they got absolutely smoked if he's not in the worst of shape. So right now I have Joel Embiid about 75-25 to play. People ask me for those stats. I completely pulled it out of my ass, but I literally had 3 different people today say, hey, what do you think the odds are of Enes Kanter playing? I know you like to put numbers on this sort of thing. I have 60-40 on Kanter. I have 75-25 on Embiid. I have absolutely no confidence in either of these numbers. These are just my gut takes based on who's posting what on Instagram and the stakes and records in each series and, what I know, having watched a lot of NBA, about what a separated shoulder feels like after that many days and what percentage of guys give it a go in important games when they, have gastroenteritis. But, I would be lying if I said I would be anxious to bet on either of those numbers, but I suspect both the big men get out there and play this evening, which is certainly interesting. We have bits of news there. Certainly if you're building on DraftKings, I do think you want to make sure to leave some space open to take advantage of the potential value opening up in Portland, which would be some of the best value on the slate in the event that Enes Kanter doesn't suit up. Myers Leonard, Zach Collins, even Al-Farouq Aminu to an extent, especially at that DraftKings price, get fairly sexy, and obviously certainly would be part of your late slate repartee on either FanDuel or DraftKings. Let me see if any brilliant person has been kind enough. They did put the link to me. Thank you. You, sir, are a gentleman and a scholar. There I am. Woo! That hair is buoyant. It is feathered, and it is lethal. It makes, if I may be so braggadocious, an ideal chipping surface. Let's put that there and tweet that out, and we have a link, and we are ready to go. So I guess we'll start by talking about what to do if Joel Embiid sits. Historically, we know this news. We had 3 game time decisions in round 1. We got the news, I believe it was 9 and 14 minutes before lock, so we're going to talk about some hypotheticals for a minute here, and then I will be prepared to, talk about the non-hypothetical realities a little more as we get down towards the end. So I'll try to speed through the 2 games a little bit and get into it. If Embiid is out, the rampage will be probably towards Greg Monroe, who I would expect to start in this matchup. And that's fine. There's going to be absolutely nothing wrong with Greg Monroe at $3,000 or $3,500. I don't know the FanDuel price offhand, but I know that he is $3K flat on DraftKings. And that's fine, and I would not tell anyone not to play Greg Monroe. It would be a really interesting question if both of them sit and you have Monroe, Leonard, Collins. That's, again, we're talking about Myers. Make sure, when I say Leonard today, use context clues. Many times I'll be referring to Myers and or Kawhi. Won't want to get those confused. And hopefully won't. So And that's fine. That's the everyone's logical first standpoint there. But there are a number of other effects if Embiid sits out. In no particular order. Number one, they'd be really thin up front. There is, again, no Mike Scott. So they need Monroe to hopefully pick up some goddamn minutes. They need Boban to pick up some damn minutes. They need Jonah Bolden to pick up some damn minutes. So they're going to be really, really thin up front if Embiid doesn't play, and that's one thing you should think of. Second, this game is a lot more likely to get the hell out of hand. So, with the exception of probably Marc Gasol, every single player on Toronto is probably net worse with Joel Embiid sitting than playing, in my opinion. It'd be close. They'd be close to neutral because, again, not having a world-class rim defender in there hanging out at center does obviously connote some upside as well, but certainly I would have some concern due to that. Three, we need to think about just the other guys on the team now having to suck up a massive amount of usage. So, sure, it's great to run to Greg Monroe, but it's a nice cookie for Ben Simmons and Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris and J.J. Redick, and your relative exposure to each of those players on a 2-game slate should probably significantly increase in the event that Joel Embiid sits, not just, a value guy opened. And D, lastly, it makes Marc Gasol pretty strong. Now, he's not going to play in the blowout. We saw that there was the pure blowout for the last, I don't remember, 3 or 4 minutes of Game 1, which had Chris Boucher out there, I think, playing center. But Marc Gasol didn't play past playing 8 or 9 minutes in the third quarter, and then they gave Serge Ibaka a solid 10, 12 minutes before they went to the deep bench. So, Marc Gasol, if this game stays close, they're not going to have anyone who's going to do a terribly good job left of stopping him, and especially at $5,000 on DK, but he's in the fives also on FanDuel, makes him a better play. Still going to prioritize Jokic for me. Let's see, other things to talk about in that scenario. If Embiid is ruled in with 5 or 6 minutes to go, I'm probably going to have to like him in tournaments. It is a dreadful matchup, especially with the additional uncertainty of his stomach not being that good, which I think casts uncertainty on his usage, his minutes, and everything else in what is, again, one of the 2 most difficult matchups in the NBA for him, in my opinion. I am reluctant. It is a ownership tournament type play. But there is, for all players, a point at which you want to own them. And Embiid is $9,400 on DraftKings. I don't know what the percentage point is in which I want him against the Raptors at that price, but it's north of 10. It's in that 10-15 range. So if you tell me I'm all of a sudden going to get 6% own Joel Embiid on a 2-game slate, yeah, I'm going to have to go with that. So there are a lot of balls in the air, to use a always popular juggling metaphor. Looking back at that first game, and again, we have a little time, so I will speed through this for a little bit, but before that first game, I did some prognostication about who would guard who and how much. So I'm going to throw out the basic number of possessions each guy was guarded by guy or guys on the opposite team in that first game, which we got almost exactly right. Not a ton of mistakes here, but it does serve to confirm a couple things, lead us towards who may have overperformed or underperformed, and also, just to back up another argument I frequently get in T2, how DVP and DVA and all that shit is generally worthless a lot of the time. Sometimes you get a guy who sits on a guy, although, if you were correctly using those sorts of stats here, you would have Ben Simmons, who's going to be the point guard in most models. You would need to have his stats when guarded by the small forward on the Raptors. It's just a goddamn nightmare. So everyone you have a situation where you are cross-guarding, like Ben Simmons, who, as expected, was primarily guarded by Kawhi Leonard, or you have a situation where a guy was guarded by tons of dudes. So, where to start? I'm just going to go through the 76ers real quick. So, of the defensive assignments on the Raptors versus the 76ers, the most consistent, the person who saw the most defensive possessions was Ben Simmons seeing Kawhi for 35 possessions. The second highest was Pascal Siakam at 16. That is about exactly what I expected. That's not good. If Embiid is out, we're having a different conversation, but people are like, wow, 7,700. 9,400 on FanDuel is still pretty close to out of play for me. If Embiid is out, FanDuel point guard is pretty crappy. There are really 4 or 5 to choose from entirely, and none of them are priced that well. Outside of the best priced in a per dollar standpoint is probably Fred VanVleet, and I'm not super excited about Fred VanVleet. So for all those reasons, yeah, $9,400 Ben Simmons would still be in play on a 2-game slate. But it's, he's seeing a metric ton of Kawhi, and then the backup there was Siakam, who saw 16 possessions against him to Kawhi's 35. That's not exciting. JJ Redick actually saw, I said he would see the most Lowry. I was correct among the starters. He actually saw the most defensive possessions from Fred VanVleet, but second was Kyle Lowry, who I thought they would put on Redick. They did that. I said I thought Butler would get Danny Green. That was barely right, but as one example of how player versus player stats, he got 24 possessions where he was majority Danny Green, 19 from Pascal Siakam, 14 from Kyle Lowry, and 9 from Kawhi Leonard. So really hard to take much out of that. And Tobias Harris saw a hodgepodge of people. He saw 23 possessions actually of Danny Green, which had something to do with him getting quite so many rebounds, 20 from Siakam, and 13 from Kawhi. Embiid obviously saw the most Gasol, and it's worth pointing out that they did not, as I suspected they might, switch the rotations for Marc Gasol to something more like Embiid. Embiid famously plays, if he's going to play 30 minutes in a game, he plays 5 minutes to start, 5 minutes on the cusp of the second and third quarters, cusp of the first and second quarters, 5 minutes to end the second, etc. He plays 6 5-minute shifts. I thought they might, for this particular matchup where literally it's kind of the reason the guy is on the team, change around Gasol's rotation, who does a more traditional start the first, end the second type thing. They did not do that. So Marc Gasol only saw a little bit more, or rather, Joel Embiid only saw a little more Marc Gasol than Serge Ibaka, and it's worth pointing out that this was about how this matchup was expected to go. Versus Marc Gasol, he took 8 shots, he made 1 of them. He scored a total of 3 points. Versus Serge Ibaka, he took 9 shots, he made 4 of them, and scored 13 points. When he was on the court against Marc Gasol, the 76ers were minus 16. When he was on the court against Serge Ibaka, they were plus 7. In a game they lost by quite a bit. So, something to keep out. Looking at the flip side of the ball, Kawhi saw basically even Simmons and Butler. He got 27 possessions out of Simmons, 24 out of Butler. Danny Green saw almost entirely JJ Redick. Again, that was the one I was most positive on. You have to hide JJ Redick somewhere, and Danny Green is the guy, which, if you wanted to play Danny Green today, that's your rationale. He gets lots of JJ Redick. That's the easiest guy on this team to burn. He saw 24 possessions from JJ Redick, but no one else even 10 for Danny Green. Lowry saw a hodgepodge, 22 of Simmons, 19 of Butler, 14 of Ennis. Siakam saw almost entirely Harris, which, again, Harris is a below-average defender. That had something to do with Siakam's good scoring game, and certainly very impressive efficiency. I like Siakam a lot today. We'll get into it more specifically in a little bit, but that was actually a very good game from him, but a below-average fantasy game based on just sort of a peculiar lack of peripherals. The rebounds, assists, steals, blocks just really weren't there. I have no reason to think that was an abstraction of something. So whereas he ended up with only about 35 for a pretty difficult price on FanDuel and about 40 on DK, in that situation I would think he would average north of 45 most of the time. So I'm still pretty much on there, and especially if you're not playing Kawhi Leonard, he would be the first person I would go on to. Gasol saw the most Embiid, shockingly, and the second most, not Ibaka, actually. They weren't, Ibaka would have been a little strange, sorry. And second most, he actually saw 18 possessions of Boban, where he was unsurprisingly a little more effective. So we continue on into this game 2 here, and seeing if Kawhi can extend his streak of never having lost a single game to the 76ers. Again, that's a little bit... that's a little bit small sample size here. Not really just small sample size, as it's a dozen games or what have you, but it's also the fact that they were in full process mode for several of those years, so he was able to take down those rebuilding teams. Other things to talk about in this game. So yeah, Ben Simmons. Again, everything I say unless I make the specific caveat otherwise is assuming Joel Embiid is in and playing and starting and playing his normal minutes. If that doesn't come to pass, we'll go there when that happens, but I do think that is the most likely scenario here, and he's just doing his game time decision thing. Ben Simmons I still really don't want. There are lots of just better priced guys. I would much rather play Jimmy Butler, for whom I have I have 1.25 fantasy points less projected for $1,100 less on DK and $2,200 less on FanDuel. Yeah, there's that. I'm on the horns of a decision between Butler and Harris. I expect Harris to be higher owned by a little bit, although I'm not sure our ownership is going to bear that out for me. But the price on... and right now we have Butler significantly higher than Tobias Harris. We have Jimmy Butler at 40%. We have Tobias Harris at 20%. I would have to stick with Tobias Harris then. I suspect Butler is a hair lower and Harris is a decent bit higher, but especially with the potentiality of a towards lock Embiid decision, kind of like those two players, and would certainly rather go with either of those two players over Ben Simmons still at this point. Redick is easily in play on both sites just because of again, Embiid can be out, which is massive for him. B, he's small forward on FanDuel, which unsurprisingly is a nightmare again, and he's really cheap there, $4,500. DK covers a couple positions. Much more excited on FanDuel. One tournament lineup would probably slightly rather Will Barton, but cash would Redick, and certainly would have no issue if he occupied that spot. Lowry, McCollum, or Murray. That leads into a number of things. If you don't have Damian Lillard, that's pretty easily McCollum for me. That's complicated. I will sort of come back to that. Regarding the other guys on the bench here, again, assuming Embiid plays, I don't have a ton of love here. I correctly said before the last game that it would be Ennis over Bolden over Zaire Smith, who I wasn't sure would even play and would not have played if that game had blown out. This is a little bit different. I would probably rather take the shot on Jonah Bolden, certainly if Embiid is out, because they're going to need him to play 20 plus minutes, almost certainly. I still don't have an issue with Ennis if he's min price on Showdown, so some 6,000 or 1,000 bullshit. He's still minimum on FanDuel. At 3,200 on DK, I would rather play a couple other guys. I would rather take a shot on Mason Plumlee. I would rather play a couple of other guys. We'll get to that game in a minute, but I think there's a real chance the minutes are scaled back at least somewhat for Denver. And if you give me, 15 minutes of Mason Plumlee, I'm going to prefer that to 22 minutes of James Ennis in this particular matchup. This is certainly a Portland team that's going to have some issues guarding players down low. For the Raptors, I still really don't want a Danny Green when he's popular. We have had chalk Danny Green something like 6 times this year, and this is the second time in the playoffs where he's had like 40+% ownership, and I've said I don't know what the fuck people are looking at every single time, and I don't think he got there on a chalk night yet. And again, you got the matchup you wanted. He saw a butt ton of JJ Redick. JJ Redick guarded him more than twice as many possessions as any other player on that team, and he still wasn't good, and still only took X shots, and Embiid being out makes that even easier. Danny Green tends to actually do better in tough matchups. Have a monster game against the Spurs, have a monster game against the Magic, have a monster game, because those other guys can't just get what they want every day, so there's lots of drive and kick, and you just get some Danny Green 3-pointers. In a vacuum, I want low-owned Danny Green in a bad matchup, not high-owned Danny Green in a good matchup, because in the good matchups, that usage and that production tends to come from other places. Kawhi Leonard at $9,700 and $9,000 is just too cheap. I could talk about it for a while. I have no reason to move away. It was like yesterday where, again, Clint Capella in low dollar stuff. The higher you got, thankfully, apparently when you spend more money, some of those people at least do some more research. You actually had Horford higher on than Capella, but in low stake stuff, Capella was like 5% higher. And on the show, I literally said, I have absolutely no rationale for, in any raw point sense, playing Clint Capella over Al Horford. There is no video, statistical floor, ceiling. There's literally no reason to make that play, which is a pretty weird declaration that I very rarely make. And it was encouraging to see it turn out as well as it did. Now, in fairness, that was about as bad of a game as you're going to get out of Clint Capella, and about as good of a game as you're going to get at Al Horford, so that's not going to end up 50-15 most days, but sort of a similar situation there where I'm not directly comparing him to anyone, but there's really no terribly good reason not to play Kawhi Leonard from any raw point standpoint. If you want to fade him because he's going to be 50% owned, higher on FanDuel, okay, that's your rationale, and definitely this game can blow out, especially if Embiid sits. He can defer a little bit. Kyle Lowry can get hot. Pascal Siakam can, do a little bit more, and he can end up with 46, and your two value guys can get there. But by any sort of how is he going to do standpoint, Kawhi Leonard looks beautiful. Marc Gasol I like quite a bit. Again, he did not play in the fourth quarter of that last game. He would have played 33 minutes or something. Instead ended up playing, I think it was about 25. It's not the most brilliant spot for him. Again, assuming Embiid is in. If Embiid is out, he's going to get a bit of what he wants. He's not a guy who really goes out there and dominates. Certainly on this team, I wouldn't expect him to with playoff Kawhi doing his thing. But I'm going to like him a lot at 5,600 and 5,000 flat in the event that Embiid sits, and he's not at all out of play right now. He's probably, in fact, he's almost certainly my center 2 on FanDuel, where none of the Portland centers, if Cantor sits, are centers. They're all power forwards, both Aminu, if you think they end up going that small, which isn't likely, but Leonard and Zach Collins are both power forwards on FanDuel. Serge Ibaka's in play regardless. 5,300 on FanDuel is more than I want to spend, but power forward isn't particularly great. Much like FanDuel, there's some players there I kind of like, but the prices aren't so attractive that I want to spend up on those guys over, say, Kawhi and Jokic. Obviously, Lillard being the most appealing of those. But I do have, and I'll get into this a little bit more, I guess, when I'm done with this game. If you are telling me I have to let go of one of Lillard, Jokic, or Kawhi, it's probably Lillard for me. And I don't blame anyone for being all up in his junk. That first round series was great. He looked great. I can spin narratives easily that aren't that far-fetched where he gets 70 tonight just because now you have, Cantor out there, and, or if Cantor doesn't play, rather, you have one other offensive player who can really kind of do shit. Mo Harkless is not going to do a ton, and Al-Farouq Aminu has been decent in this matchup over the last year, although I do think that's really apropos of nothing. Zach Collins, Myers Leonard. You would, in this situation, need Damian Lillard to do a shit ton of lifting, and I certainly think that in the event Cantor is out, I'm even more inclined towards Lillard. It makes it a tougher decision for me, but I have trouble getting away from Jokic in this spot, and I have trouble getting away from Kawhi Leonard, especially on the shit position on FanDuel where position really matters. So he ends up, as of this moment, expecting all the big men to play, coming in number 3 for me out of those guys. Kyle Lowry at 75 and 68. I would like him more on FanDuel, where 75 is actually a slightly better price, and point guard is dog shit, so there's a real chance he could get you 33, and you'd be like, good enough. Like, that's a real possibility there. Yahoo Cash, Torrey Craig and Danny Green, or Will Barton and JJ Redick. Barton and Redick. But anyhow, Serge Ibaka 5,300. Again, FanDuel or power forward is a lot like point guard in that there are decent scoring spend up options, but the prices don't super excite me. 5,300 is in play. And DK 4,200 is pretty strong. They are still trying to limit Gasol's minutes a little bit. If Embiid is out, they'll take the opportunity to do that again. There's an upside in the event that you don't get, that you get a bad game out of Marc Gasol or foul trouble out of Marc Gasol or any number of things, and you randomly get 26 minutes of Serge Ibaka. I'd have a lot of interest at $4,200. Fred VanVleet is one of the best plays on FanDuel, where I have him projected to not be terribly good, but just it's a point guard position where I'm not thrilled with the prices on Lowry and Jamal Murray, and so I've really got not a lot of great choices, and so I expect his ownership to be significant, but it should be for that reason. Norm Powell, the best $3,100 and under play on DK, I believe, off the top, assuming Cantor isn't. And so maintain some merit on that site for that reason. $4,300 on a 2-game slate on FanDuel, where that's still a very droppable price, is still fine to play for Storm and Norman. Let me check on a couple of things, and then we will continue on to discussing the second game a little more in depth. So I gave some of the reasons. Someone just said Beasley or Barton raw points. I will very hesitantly say Will Barton. Based on how bad his play, and they were slow on the move to put him to the bench. Excuse me. A little bit sick. They were slow to put him in the bench. He's still got his significant minutes when he was even in the midst of his cold spell. Got 25 off the bench one game. Just a bit more of an upside guy. I hesitantly am slightly more encouraged in a new series with the minutes from him, but I just don't know what they're going to do. I really don't. It changes whether or not Cantor plays or not, and how more likely they are to go with more big guys, and in a situation like that, maybe you see more Jokic next to Plumlee, and there's just a lot up in the air right now. But as of right now, if I have to play either of those guys, and they're both great for tournaments at 3,600, 3,700. Those are fine numbers on DraftKings for Beasley and Barton. Yeah, I would probably Barton right now, but fairly little confidence in how this rotation works out. I spend a lot of time looking through who guarded who, how much, going through the regular season, different things that were made. I mean, Cantor has missed exactly 2 games since coming to the Trailblazers. The first was before Nurkic went down, making it kind of irrelevant. The second was the regular season closer against Sacramento, where they ran a 6-man rotation. No, I'm really not kidding you. They played 6 guys. 3 of the Trailblazers played 48 minutes. I think Myers Leonard started and played 12 minutes, and Zach Collins came off the bench and played 13. I'm sorry, Myers Leonard started and played 42 minutes. Zach Collins came off the bench and played 13 as the only bench player in the game for the team. Again, I read that to think that Collins is ahead of Leonard, but choosing between those 2 guys is really difficult. My best guess, which again, Terry Stotts is a very good coach, but has been a frustrating DFS coach many times. Of the coaches' names that are followed by expletives in the Awesemo.com premium Slack, Terry Stotts is top 5. He's not, Fizdale, Gentry, he's not there. But Stotts, who is a much better coach than either of those gentlemen, still is prone to making lineup changes, and unlike those other guys, usually I understand exactly why, but not always, and it's a bit of an adventure. So, new series, and if Enes Kanter is out, I will throw my best guess out there that Myers Leonard starts. My projection that I have right now is that Myers Leonard starts. Zach Collins comes off the bench. I have Myers Leonard for 25 minutes and Zach Collins for 28. I slightly prefer Zach Collins as of this writing. Slightly better fantasy basketball player. Does blocks, does steals. Actually like Zach Collins before the acquisition of Kanter this year. I would have expected him to quite possibly be the starting center for this team next year. I'm a sort of a Zach Collins stan. But their usage is a little bit flippity-floppity. I do think generally Collins is ahead, but I think they're a little more inclined to keep the second unit a little more intact. I don't know. That's really everything I got for you in this context. Let's talk a little more about this second game here. One of the reasons I have Lillard a slight tier behind those other two guys, and I'm not the only one, by the way. That's also what we have projected for ownership, which is frustrating. I was kind of hoping people would be a little more Lillard-stanny, Lillard season. Lillard was going to be 55% owned, and Kanter might be out, and people would get all up on his junk. He's lower owned than Jokic and Kawhi right now, which I think he should be. And that's my estimation of them relative to their points totals. This is not, a tremendous matchup here. Lillard played all 4 games against Denver this year. He did not get to 50 fantasy points in any of them. That's regular season. The minutes were obviously shorter. Nurkic is in there, which is a net negative for him, etc., etc. But, it's not and again, that has a lot to do with the fact that the person who guarded him by significant amount was Gary Harris. Gary Harris played 3 of those games. In those 3 games, he guarded Lillard something to the order of 80 times. No one else exceeded 40. So, now, Gary Harris can't shut down Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard is a better offensive player than Gary Harris is a defensive one, although it's not as far away as some people would think. And again, everyone loves Damian Lillard. He's one of the most overall loved guys out there. Like, relative to number of Lillard fans to guys who dislike Damian Lillard, the ratio on him is better than more than just about any other player in the NBA. He's, Kawhi of 3 years ago. Everybody loves himself some Damian Lillard. And I'm not going to have any issue. If you said I'm playing 100% Damian Lillard tonight, I'd be like, yeah, that's probably fine. Like, the odds of a pure disappointment, they're unlikely. Although he did have in 2 of the games this year, I want to say like 28 and 30. I was looking at it. It was not terribly brilliant. He had a 30 and a 29, a 42 and a 47 if you want the full outlook in those 4 games. I'll throw minutes in there to give it a little more context. But those 4 games this year... Hold on, I want to make sure I'm getting it right. Yeah. 40 minutes, 30 fantasy points. 38 minutes, 42 fantasy points. 39 minutes, 30 fantasy points. 38 minutes, 40 fantasy points. No, I reversed the last one. It's 38 minutes, 47 fantasy points. Pardon me. But not only going playing. So, it is not to me a great matchup for Damian Lillard. I will go ahead and say it is below average. It's going to be fairly popular due to going off. All these things are relative to ownership. So I don't know if we're going to get an update anytime soon. I have no reason to particularly expect that we would. But does Paul Millsap become unwashed in this matchup? It's worth the risk to guess that he does. I believe we probably have him as the highest owned guy. I looked at it for a second ago. I think we had him on top. We do, and we should. It's difficult to put into words how much more I like $4,800 Paul Millsap than $4,000 Danny Green. 56% Paul Millsap, that's about right. And again, going against a hurting front court, etc., etc., he's very good. He's very good next to Jokic. He's even better if you're not playing Jokic. 47% Danny Green is mind-boggling to me. I guess if you don't look at anything. FanDuel, 79% Paul Millsap. Yeah, the guys at power forward are just a little too goddamn expensive, and he's too cheap. And there's not a lot of too cheap dudes on FanDuel. Paul Millsap is too cheap. Gary Harris is too cheap. JJ Redick might be too cheap, but by like $100 or something. He's around where he should be, which is by extension too expensive on DK. Fred VanVleet is too cheap. But there's literally Marcus All is too cheap. That's like $5. That's like it. So yeah, it's really difficult for me to get away there. I think you can build interesting contrarian lineups where you play Pascal Siakam and Tobias Harris, and if both of them have games and Paul Millsap doesn't, you have set yourself very well against the field. Again, for all players, there is a point where their ownership is correct. On DK, he's about where it should be. On FanDuel, it may be too high. 79%, if that is remotely the ownership. That is a ginormous goddamn number, and his odds of failing even in a spectacular fashion and not getting to, let's say, 20 are pretty significant. But the thing is, that doesn't even necessarily kill you. If you play Paul Millsap at 80% owned and he gets 19, what exactly happens to you on FanDuel where you get screwed? Like, you still need to have miss on the other guy you presumably paid up for. Let me do it. If we're going to spend this time talking about it, let me do a slightly deeper dive on the position. But it's bad, broskies. So let's take a look. Like Aminu is the only other guy who I look at and go like, sure, because again, it's not a great position. You don't want to spend up. So I much prefer $8,300 Pascal Siakam to Tobias Harris. There's no way to go through that whole thing again. But you have Harris at 85. That's more than I want to spend on Tobias Harris. Pascal at 83. It's a little more than I want to spend on Pascal, but it's at least reasonable, and I think there's a much better chance he gets 50 than, say, Harris. Aminu, 55. Cool. Ibaka, 53. We discussed. Millsap, 48. Yeah, there's a reason he's that damn cheap. Do I think... Alright, I'll read that question in a second. So then you have Zach Collins, 38, who I slightly prefer to Myers Leonard at 35 if you have the $300. If the $300 is doing anything for you, I have those guys projected pretty close. And again, you're probably going to have to make this selection. Not necessarily. We may get news Enes Kanter is out in the next 20 minutes and be ready to move. But I would slightly prefer Zach Collins at 38. Even to Myers Leonard at 35. If Kanter plays, how many minutes do you have him playing? 31. I think if he plays, he plays. Again, I've had that exact injury. It's not dissimilar from the Paul George injury. Just everything hurts every time you pick your arm up. The whole ball and socket shoulder joint is extremely painful. So I don't want to really play Kanter. Now, you may get Enes Kanter at some stupid cheap number. Low owned number. He's down to 67 on FanDuel. He's 61 on DK. Any raw point sensibility, I can't recommend him over Marc Gasol. I can't recommend him over Nikola Jokic. But, 3% owned Enes Kanter is the best Enes Kanter. So especially on DK, the ownership will not come up enough. He's going to be owned 8% on DK if he plays and starts. And it's going to be a low number because people are going to be, appropriately, all over Jokic's stuff. A lot of people are going to throw Millsap in that slot. People play Marc Gasol, etc. So I'm going to have some interest in $6,100 Enes Kanter, but again, understand that it is purely get a guy who does have an upside. But the greater likelihood is that he's not as functional as he normally is and not a particularly great matchup. I don't mind the matchup with Jokic in fairness, but rebounding and shooting are things that require you to lift your arms over your head. And that is somewhat more difficult when you are recovering from a recently separated shoulder. A lot of people have been sort of game log watching Al-Farouq Aminu, who was solid to good all of the games this year against Denver. $4,300 is objectively too cheap for him, especially with the potential opening of minutes and usage and Kanter out. And so on. I'm a big fan of his. I don't think that log means a ton. Kanter was his primary, Millsap was his primary defender for much of those games. If you go back previous years, Millsap did just a fine job against him. The shooting was a little better than normal. I think it's fine. I have him projected for north of 30 minutes, north of 25 fantasy points, so I'm pretty interested in him at $4,300, but I don't concur with the narrative that, this is going to be, this is an Aminu spot for any particularly great reason. His production is frankly pretty random relative to matchup. I'm curious how we have him owned versus Harkless. Because if Harkless is half the ownership, I will go with Harkless. I do prefer... We have Aminu at 39, Harkless at 37. Oh, okay. Let me refresh. Last updated 19 minutes ago. Okay. We now have Millsap at 56 on DK, still 79 on, so this is all. We have Kawhi at 50%, sounds good. Siakam at 48%. I'm surprised it's that high after what's kind of a disappointing. Danny Green at 47. Jokic at 45. Lowry at 43. Yeah, again, I'm going to come in under that number again. just not quite as good of a matchup for him, and those other guys are going to eat, and that's generally going to take away from him. Absolutely fine in tournaments. Butler 39. Yeah, I mean, we still have Butler 39, Tobias Harris 22, so those numbers are starting to get closer to each other. I have them pretty similar from a points per dollar standpoint, with Butler a little bit better, but 39 to 22, I would play Tobias Harris. I suspect that may still be too wide a gulf of that 17%. I do think it ends up being closer. Let's see, any other interesting numbers here? Gary Harris gets on Lillard defensively in those games, but Lillard does guard Jamal Murray and does a fairly good job at it. I'm fine with Jamal Murray on both sides. He's not someone I'm prioritizing. If you are not playing Jokic, which around half people aren't going to, he is in that list of guys I really want to get. I want to be playing at the very least one of Murray, Millsap, or Plumlee. And really no issue with two of those. As a matter of fact, I'd really probably want to play two of those three players in the event that I'm not playing Jokic in a lineup. So, yeah. Gary Harris himself, absolutely fine to roll on anything. He's a little bit too cheap. I don't think you get 40-plus minutes again. A couple of people have said that. I think that's unlikely, but possible here. But they have been a little reluctant to eschew their bench that much for most of this year, and in a game one, I just still think you see those guys getting high teens out of Beasley and Morris, etc. off the bench. So I have him for 36 minutes right now, but 36 minutes of him in a perfectly tolerable matchup at $4,800, $4,900, I think, are the Gary Harris prices. Like plenty on DK and like quite a bit on FanDuel, where he's distinctly cheap. CJ McCollum, to me, I like mostly because I could see myself having less Lillard than the field, and that's how I'm compensating. Someone's going to have to score here, right? So they're going to cross guard. He gets Murray, who's the easier matchup to go against here frequently on defense, plus some bits of Beasley and Barton and some other spots that are a little easier to operate in. And generally, when you don't get brilliance out of Lillard, the most likely guy to get brilliance out of, especially if you have no Nurkic and potentially no Canner, is CJ McCollum. That price on FanDuel is wholly unappealing. But on DK, it really doesn't feel too bad for me, and much like we talked about if you don't have Jokic, if you have your lineups, I guess going through each of those studs there, if you don't have Lillard, yeah, McCollum is the first guy I am trying to get in there. If you don't have Kawhi, it's probably the Embiid status would change this around a little bit, but it's probably Pascal then Lowry for me. Almost certainly wanting to have one of those fine fellows on my roster. Let's see. Had an unusual number of people ask me about Evan Turner today. I don't consider it purely out of play for what is now obviously a very appealing price. Played an average of around 10 minutes a game, I think, in the first series, with a couple around 15 and a couple in the single digits. But the thinking is not, purely incorrect that, Cantor out, someone's got to step on the goddamn court. You could be looking at, him getting the role, but I'm just not confident in that versus Hood, let alone the more logical choices of Collins, Leonard, Aminu, Harkless even, and just pushing those guys down a little bit who can play, the 3-4. So, I don't think I would get to Evan Turner, I guess is my point, and a number of people have discussed him. I'm sure I'm forgetting someone here. You can obviously play Monty Morris. He is a direct pivot off of Jamal Murray. You need some Jamal Murray foul trouble. Guarding Damian Lillard can cause someone some foul trouble. Your most likely scenario is 17 to 21 minutes and approximately the same number of fantasy points. Not a ton of upside if shit doesn't go squirrely, but on 2-game slates, shit going squirrely is frequently how you win yourself 6 figures. So, in a vacuum, looking at DK prices, looking at those random guys, let's say we're talking about now Craig Beasley, Morris Barton, I probably would be most inclined towards Barton, Beasley, Morris, Craig. I can't be sure Craig isn't pushed back into his teens role that he was occupying for a while. There's a real chance that he's pushed forward and they use him on when Gary Harris isn't there and he gets all the Damian Lillard assignment and still plays 20 whatever minutes, so I don't think he is out of play, but at the DK prices, my degree of interest is probably, again, Barton, Beasley, Morris, Craig. On FanDuel, it would probably be Beasley most of the top because of the price and the position. All right, let's look at some questions. Again, please keep me up to date on news or other things that I may have missed. Joel Embiid will play. I am shocked. I'm not shocked. So, that news came out at 7:44 approximately. 16 minutes before lock. I guess I'm still off in general. This isn't like game one where I recommended a 0. The price has come down. That is relevant. And again, if you're looking to play Joel Embiid, the things you're hanging your hat on are, 1, his ownership will be reduced due to this additional load of bullshit. And 2, everybody is starting who we expected. 1, his minutes will be reduced due to this most recent spate of gastroenteritis brand building. And 2, the fact that he did see pretty significant time out there against Serge Ibaka as opposed to Marc Gasol, and was much more effective in that time. And you're hoping that in that, it was significant, 14 minutes, that he can really get some damage in there. So, I still have him pretty low priority as a spend-up option for many points per dollar sense. But we will talk about the ownership in 13 minutes, and there is a real chance that that is going to make some sense of this. Zaire Smith is inactive, so I really have him behind those other guys. Yeah, so it's still Ennis now for me. I don't like Ennis. Not a super upside guy. Played about as well as he's going to in that last game. Still really wasn't good enough. If he was like 1,000 on some showdown-y thing, yeah, okay, I can go with that. But I'm not super excited about it. I would probably rather Bolden for spiking an upside. But again, it should be pointed out, the 76ers are the worst team to target on this slate. We don't want to play Embiid. We don't want to play Simmons early. Redick is cheap enough, he gets in there. Butler has come down where, okay, not the best position on FanDuel, and the price is especially beneficial. Like, you can do it, but I'm not thrilled with it. And, Tobias Harris, like, I have to play over Pascal, and like it's just, this is the team kind of to avoid. I imagine most of my lineups would have a 76er in them. Maybe 2, on FanDuel where you end up with Butler Redick, or something like that, or Tobias Redick, or just one of those guys. But, yeah, there's not a ton to love here for me. So, moving through some questions and comments. It's like I'm on a coke fiend. I'm sick, so I've been sneezing a lot, so my nose is really, itchy today, but I'm just here like, gotta get some more of that news. Okay. So let's look at some questions, and there are many. For what it's worth, they activated Amir. Noted. What would you think about fading Jokic and or Embiid on DK and play like Millsap and Siakam at the center position? I think it's fine. I don't want to play Embiid, so fading him is fine. Playing him is fine at what I now think is like a 10% position, but I would be inclined to play little or none. Just a lot of shit needs to go that way, and he's expensive. So you're not just playing Joel Embiid, you're playing Embiid over some of Jokic, Leonard, Siakam, Lillard, etc. That just doesn't make sense from any raw point standpoint. He's fine to throw out there in the tournament. Play like Millsap and Siakam at center? Yeah, sure. You do not need to play any of those guys. I would probably still play Marc Gasol and play him next to like Paul Millsap at that point. They would all make some sense. Lowry, McCollum, or Murray. If you are playing Lillard, I will probably play Jamal Murray there. If you are not playing Lillard, play McCollum. If you are not playing Jokic, play Murray. It's going to have a lot to do with correlation, but they do profile pretty similarly for me, so it is a good question. Harkless, Aminu, or Ibaka, DK, GPP? Well, I'm going to take a look at all our projected ownership and answer that question as only I can. And when I say as only I can, I mean as anyone can and frequently does. Embiid at 24% we have. I will take the under on that number now. In a single DK GPP lineup of those three guys, I would probably play Aminu the most, but I have them all incredibly close. I have trouble making a take of Aminu, Ibaka, and Harkless. Probably want to go more towards game stacking. I imagine I'm more away from the first one, so in general, I imagine I land on Aminu than Harkless than Ibaka, but they do profile very similarly. If you happen to be particularly heavy on the first game, I could see going to Ibaka. Are we fine fading the Sixers in a single lineup if Embiid is in? I'm absolutely fine with it. There's any number of ways that work. One, they all even out production. I mean, in the last game, if Jimmy Butler gets 10 of Tobias Harris's points, no one was good. Or I guess Redick at his value price was maybe good, but we almost got that last game where we had one good 76er. If Butler makes a few more shots and, Tobias Harris doesn't get his 15 rebounds or whatever the hell, yeah, no one would have been good. So I'm absolutely fine with doing that. I'm not sure I'm on the horns of recommending it. Like, I still think one is probably better on a 2-game slate. I'm having no exposure. This is a little too much of fucks up. So I have a feeling one feels a little bit better for me. Ignoring Redick. Redick doesn't count. Spending on a 76er feels a little better to me, but it's close to what I would consider optimal. Aminu and Harkless in the same lineup or no? No problem with it whatsoever. I probably like it. I think they add to each other. I want to be more on that game. You're giving yourself over timeouts. They're not playing the same damn position. You're giving yourself bonus. Cantor sits out equity, you're giving yourself bonus. It's an odd lineup construction because very few people will end up with it situation, and it's not hard to imagine. Look, if I'm saying my biggest flaw with saying I'm not thrilled with Lillard is someone's got to score on this goddamn team, right? This team's going to score 100 points, right? Although not many teams are doing that the last few days, but this team's going to score 100 points. Okay, if Cantor's not in there, just a real possibility. Doesn't Lillard have to get 35 of them? And, McCollum get 25? So that... Still, I need Harkless and Aminu to take some shots and put up some buckets. Like, there's just a point at which those guys have to produce. Someone on this team has to score. If I'm going to put forth an argument where Gary Harris is an elite defender, he should be all the hell over Damian Lillard, I really need other dudes to score, right? So if I'm saying that's a legit possibility, I have to say that those other guys both getting there is a legit possibility as well. Can you punt with Bolden if Embiid plays? Yes. Barton or Beasley raw DK points? Barton. Murray over Lowry straight up on FanDuel? Yes. Certainly if you don't have Jokic. If for some reason you don't have Kawhi, that would turn into Lowry for me, but assuming like most people you started with Kawhi and Jokic, yes. Would you play Butler and Tobias in the same lineup if Embiid is in/out? He's in, so no. Gary Harris or Redick on DK. Already have 4 other Nuggets. At that point, I'll go to Redick. Looking at complete, and not by any great thing, by the way. Have your 5th one and have Harris in there, that's fine. 2 of your guys are very cheap, but I almost don't count. You have Plum Dog and Millsap in there. So you're going more into the backcourt, etc. Looking at FanDuel ownership, is there anyone you want to be overweight on today? I'll look in a second. Can you play Collins if Cantor is in? Absolutely. Does Paul Millsap become unwashed in this matchup? Yes. I have him averaging 29 fantasy points a game in this series, and I think he gets to 40 at least once. Do you mind Plumlee as a punt on FanDuel? No. Thoughts on Hood or Turner as a FanDuel punt? If I had to play one of those guys, I would play Turner. Do you think Brett Brown sticks with Korkmaz and release of Scott, or maybe gives in and gives Jonathan Simmons some more minutes? I have no reason nor any comments leading me in that direction, though it should be worth pointing out I believe Korkmaz played 12 minutes. He was notably the first guy off the bench into the game, but he played 12 minutes. $2,700 Korkmaz is in play. Minimum price punt Korkmaz on FanDuel is in play, but I don't like any of that in a really, really bad matchup where they're probably all playing 10x minutes. Butler or Murray on DK. If you don't have, in general, if you don't have Jokic, Murray. If you have Jokic, I probably Butler. I don't feel great about it, and I have Murray projected for 1 more raw point, which makes me nervous. And as a matter of fact, at the ownership, I don't have a great rationale there. So I just sort of want to play Butler for no particularly discernibly good reason. It's going to shoot better, etc. But I think my answer there is actually Murray. I'll reverse myself. But it's obviously very, very close. Siakam or Tobias on FanDuel if you already have Kawhi. I'll stick with Siakam. How many Nuggets are too many in a lineup on DK? Again, I can't answer that question because most of them, several of them, one is almost certainly Millsap. Another one probably costs 3x. So at that point, you have to give me the specific names or I can't answer the question. Yahoo Cash, Gary Harris. and Boban or Zach Collins or Redick and Fred VanVleet. Redick and Fred VanVleet. Butler or Murray if you have no Sixers. Razor thin. Got to make your own call there. I'd be bullshitting if I gave a take because I just don't feel strongly one way or the other. Murray over Lowry straight up on FanDuel, yes. Plumlee really cheap for value, yes. I like him a lot. The matchup is brilliant. Again, I think the minutes come down for Jokic. Any takes for either showdown game? No, did not have time to get on that. I do apologize. GPP, Barton or Redick? Probably Barton for me in one lineup. Do I expect Barton to start? I do not, but it wouldn't shock me. But it wouldn't radically change my projection for him. He's much more effective off the bench as far as production. Like, he's literally worth an extra 0.2 fantasy points per minute, and his minutes come down by a little more than that. So I do think he's nominally better starting. But even if he starts, the minutes could still be only 24, and it's not a distinction that I think is particularly important. McCollum or Butler? If you have Lillard, I would probably run Butler most of the time. Again, I consider that razor thin. Him, Murray, Butler, McCollum, all those guys profile really close for me today. VanVleet or Curry? Yeah, that's a fair question. On FanDuel, if you can do something with that $700, I do not mind Steph Curry here. Again, we talked about them needing punch from someone. Saw, north of 20 minutes on average in that last series. Don't mind Steph Curry at minimum on FanDuel. DK also, the exact same price, I think $3,500. Fine to play. I do have VanVleet projected higher. DK, GPP, Siakam and Murray, or Jokic and Redick. I will play Jokic and Redick more often than not. Lowry, Siakam, Kawhi in the same DK lineup. I'm fine with it. I think when you add the third one, it is generally worse on an individual basis, but you're also creating a more unique lineup. If you have that and you like it, I really have no issue with it whatsoever. Would have been more excited if Embiid had been out, making it more likely the game track meets a little more, but Redick or Gary Harris already have Jokic, Barton, Millsap, and Plumlee. At that point, I probably play JJ Redick more often than not. Going into the tank with 2 minutes to go. That was fun, though, rapid fire round. Going into the tank. Thank you for skipping you. I assure you I didn't intentionally skip anyone. When I'm going that fast, I don't even have time to read the names on the questions, much less do so and then intentionally skip someone. But I apologize if in the 31 questions I answered in the last 7 minutes, I did not address yours. I assure you it was unintentional. Please do forgive. So salty. That's what she said. Coming down to it now. Back to the beats. 40 seconds. Alright. No news is bad news. Embiid will play. Someone just tweeted at me. Thank you. Myers Leonard or Bolden on FanDuel? I would have said Myers Leonard. I apologize for not hitting your question before lock there, Mr. Mullins. But I would have said Myers Leonard. Alright, so let's take a look at some ownerships. Let's go back to, we'll do FanDuel first, as has been our want. Alright, the 300K shot. Again, I'm really excited that these tournaments have been so big and consistently filling. Giving us some great opportunity here. Kawhi, 76%. Yeah, I'm in no way surprised by that. Nice to see JJ Redick 47% though, as that is going to be by far the most common pairing at small forward. Ennis 18, you would want less than that. Clicking on names. Serge Ibaka, 14.6. That feels pretty good if you're on FanDuel. That feels like a good number. I'd be pretty excited if I had that. Jimmy Butler, 40. Fred VanVleet, 28. Yeah, no strong takes on any of this. This all makes sense. Tobias Harris, 20. I like Tobias Harris at 20. Like, I am bravo, internet, for not being... I mean, I sit there and I talk shit and I talk about being enslaved and reacting to the first game. Tobias Harris outscored Pascal Siakam in that first game, though he didn't look quite as good, and Pascal made 80% of his shots or whatever, and Tobias made 40, but just picked up all the peripherals and rebounds and shit. But Pascal Siakam in the largest event on FanDuel is 43%. Tobias Harris is 20. So, that being a long way around of saying, tip of the cap to you there, internet. I underestimated you. Danny Green, 24%. Maybe I overestimated you. I'm just kidding. On FanDuel, that's a perfectly tolerable number. And I do expect that we will end up under our projection on DK. Now that we talk about it. I want to find an Embiid because I'm really curious. Marc Gasol, 20. That feels great. Again, Jokic is going to be 65. So I'm going to guess Embiid at like 13. I'm poking around looking for one. Again, it's not like you guys could get some sort of downloadable CSV or something. You have only been doing this for, 10 years. So, downloading a spreadsheet that's some advanced functionality. But, if you get a second, it would be useful at times like this. Greg Monroe, 0.4%. I actually found a Greg Monroe before I found a Joel Embiid. That's objectively humorous. Come on, show me my 12% Joel Embiid. Calling it now. Alright, if somebody can find... 13%! Oh, I was so close. Okay. $300 cheaper. I mean, you're going to get a really unique lineup there. He's going to be 1/5 of the ownership of Jokic. Does he outscore him every 6th time, which would sort of be the corollary math there? Can't say I'd be shocked. It's about right. So again, that came in where we expected. Let's find something on DK. Aha! A 400K fadeaway. And click this really convenient export lineups to CSV button. Let's see how we did. So yeah, before looking, I'm going to say we have less Butler than we expected, than the ownerships expected. A little less Danny Green, a little more Tobias Harris. Alright, here we go. Number 1, Kawhi Leonard, 61. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all. Number 2, Pascal Siakam. So that one we were under on. Number 2, Pascal Siakam, basically right on the nose, 49%. Number 3, JJ Redick. I'd have had less than that with Embiid in. It's a shit matchup. 37% on DK. Like, FanDuel 4,500 is much, much, much better than 4,700 on DK. And there's just other infinite value guys to look at everywhere in the late game. I'm leaving that spot open and looking at, we've announced Will Barton is starting. Or Cantor isn't starting, I have forward position. Like, I would be under 37% Redick. 31% Lowry. 31% Butler. Okay, so yeah, like I said, a little less there. And 28.5% Tobias Harris. I'm going to give myself the Barry Horowitz there. Less of that. 27% Danny Green. People weren't quite that crazy. But don't worry, you'd still want less than that. Ben Simmons, 24. Marc Gasol, 20. Feels pretty good at 5K. I'm still a fan of that. Serge, 17. Joel Embiid, 16. I would still barely want less than that. But yeah, that's around the point it should be at. Fred VanVleet, 11 and change. James Ennis, 10 and change. Boban, 5.8. Norman Powell, 3.7. Furkan Korkmaz, 2.9. Jonah Bolden, 1.4. TJ McConnell, 0.4. Amir Johnson, 0.4. Greg Monroe, 0.24. Almost certainly not playing. But you didn't technically play yourself. But you certainly had impure thoughts in that area. Jonathan Simmons, 0.18. Jeremy Lin, 0.07. Zaire Smith, 0.05. Congratulations, you played yourself. Technically declared inactive for this game. Will not be playing. And then some other guys there. Shout out to the guy who owned Mike Scott and OG Anunoby. Those guys have been out for a little bit of time. We are done, my friends. An early swat for Jimmy Butler. Nothing else. 2.5 minutes in. It's a slow-going game thus far. I have a feeling things will pick up. So, there we are. Enjoyable for me as always. Was it good for you? I hope so. So yeah, enjoy this evening's games. I will be back again tomorrow. And off the top of my head, I think Wednesday I may take a day off. If they throw out like $2/3 million in prizes again, I will probably come back because they've been, money's money. Yo, I gotta help y'all make that fat stacks. I appreciate the praise. Yeah, it's been a weird. Like the playoffs were really weirdly streaky. As in, like, the first 4 days were close to perfect. I had, like, perfect is pretty rare. There's shows where literally I don't feel like I get anything wrong and talk through everything well. But there were, like, 3 dicey days in a row there where Embiid had his completely improbable game. But it was, like, we're 15 days into the playoffs or what have you, and it was, like, 5 good days, 4 bad days, 6 really good days. So it's been streaky. But generally it seemed... and most of you would know better than I would to be pretty on target over the last few days. We've done really well with it. Yeah, don't play this guy, don't play this guy, don't play this guy, go overweight on this guy. Most of the big calls have worked out. So yeah, I appreciate that, and we'll do the best we can to keep it going. It's the best I can do. But again, one game, one day means shit. Spread it out over a couple months. And if you're still losing, well, then blame me, and it's my fault. So there we have it. Until tomorrow, I am Fast 80 Fear. Bonne chance.